Namaste, everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of Azure for Sure live show. I'm your host, Simon, and for the next 9 to 10 episodes, we're going to try to get started you with your journey of Azure. And I really want to thank everyone who has joined us today and people who will be watching this live episode as an archived video later on. I want to start this live show by asking you one question, and you just have to answer this question with yes or no in the comments. And that question is very simple. That have you ever used Azure? Right? Just go ahead and drop in the comments. It will give us an idea that if I've ever used Azure or not. If you are a student, if you are a developer, and it would be great if you can go ahead and also share some of the services that you have used. So this live show is going to be somewhere, this Azure live show is going to be somewhere around 9 to 10 episodes. We already have the guests booked, we have the entire schedule lined up, and we are really excited. So today's live show is for about 25 minutes, and we have kind of divided this into two halves. In the first half, I'm going to ask our guest today, who is Buck Woody. He works as an applied data scientist at Microsoft. We're going to ask him on how he got started with the tech, then with this cloud, the journey of Azure. I think that's going to be a really exciting part of this live show. And then towards the second half, we're going to talk on how you can get started with Azure, some of the resources, how you can build your own learning path, and a lot more. So without any further ado, let's invite our guest of the show, Buck Woody. Hi, Buck. Welcome to the Azure for Sure live show.
Hey, Simon, how are you? It's good to see you again.
I'm doing good. Thank you. Thank you so much, Buck. In the beginning, I would like to say thank you so much for accepting the invitation. I know you are very busy. So, yeah, thank you so much. So, Buck, let's get straight to the business, right?
Sure.
We don't have time. So, first thing first, I'm going to ask you the most toughest question, and that is who is Buck Woody and what he does?
Yeah, I've been accused of a lot of things, but my mom tells people that my son works at Microsoft and he helps people with their computers. That's what she understands that I do. I think a lot of our mothers aren't always familiar with technology, are they? So that's fine. That's probably good enough. I'm a data scientist here at Microsoft. I've been here about 16 years now. And I've been on lots of different teams, from Department of Defense, working in consulting, to the SQL Server team. I was on our artificial and intelligence and machine learning team for a while, and also done some other things. And now I'm back on the SQL Server team, but I work with the artificial intelligence and machine learning side of the Azure Data Platform.
Wow, that sounds so cool. You have been doing so many things at the same time now: AI, data, SQL. So you know, Buck, you look as young as me, right? But I feel you have a little edge when it comes to experience, right? So how, yeah, a little, right? A little. So how did you actually get into tech? And I would also like to know, when did you get into tech?
Yeah, it's interesting. Our story today, as we move through this, is connected in a lot of ways. I started out in technology, just kind of like most of you, fooling around in high school and before that with technology. Although in my day, you actually had to build your own computer. This was in the late 70s. And there's a connection between when I started with technology and Microsoft Azure as a platform. And what a lot of people don't know is that Microsoft Azure as a platform, as we know it today, over 600 services in dozens of regions around the world, is actually related to VisiCalc which is the original spreadsheet program that was used on PCs. So there's a lot of interaction there. I got fascinated, like most of your readers, with technology. Mine was more on the hardware side because, again, I had to build my own stuff. And I built a computer. It used a black and white TV as a screen, and it used a cassette. If people even know what that is anymore, a cassette tape recorder as the storage. And it had 1K of memory. And I wrote some
Wow.
games, and I wrote a word processing system, real fun stuff, to help me with schoolwork, believe it or not, so that I was not a very good typist. And so with a word processor, I could type something out and then hit print, and it would be perfect every time. So that was the reason I got involved, and have been in everything from hardware. I've worked at NASA for a while. I worked for IBM shops. I've done a lot of things, from mainframes to microcomputers, to mini computers, which were the things in between, AS400 systems, PIC systems, which is a medical computing system, and a lot of different things in between. And I'm just kind of fascinated by anything that's technology related.
My goodness, Bug. I'll be very honest with you, but half of the things that you said that you have been using, it went over my head. I've never heard. I just couldn't get it. For me, it was just it's my journey started with Windows XP. That's how it started. So, but Bug, with that tells me that something has been bothering me from the beginning of this live show. Can you guess what it is?
Am I reflecting on my glasses again? It's the glasses, right?
No, that's okay. But what's really bothering me is your T-shirt.
The
It's a
shirt.
yeah. It's a Microsoft Azure. Why in this world do you have a Windows logo and a Windows written over there? What's up with that?
Well, I told you that Microsoft Azure was
Mhm.
actually related to when I started, and when VisiCalc as a calculating program, rows and columns, started. And it all goes back to a guy that you just showed
Mhm.
named Ray Ozzie. Ray Ozzie. Now, Ray Ozzie might not be a name that a lot of folks are familiar with, but back in 1979, when I was playing around with technology, Ray Ozzie was graduating with his bachelor's degree, and basically he worked for a company called Data General. And he went to work for a guy named Dan Bricklin. Dan Bricklin. And Dan Bricklin, along with a guy named Bob Frankston, were the creators of VisiCalc, which was the original spreadsheet that we're familiar with. So, okay, he left from there and he went to a place called Lotus. And some of your listeners might be familiar with Lotus 123, which was sort of the second big sort of spreadsheet program. And that was even available up into the Windows era. Now, a lot of people don't realize that spreadsheets were like the guts of all kinds of computing on a PC. That was the main killer application that everyone used. So they actually started branching out from that, and they created something called Lotus Symphony. And Lotus Symphony was kind of interesting. It was like a word processor and other things, all based on the Lotus spreadsheet. So they were integrated, and people don't remember that things were not integrated back then. If you did something in a database or a word processing program, it didn't have access. There was no clipboard, there was no OLEDB sharing, none of that kind of thing. All right, so he left there and he went and started a product that later became bought by Lotus again, called Lotus Notes. Now, some of you might be familiar with Lotus Notes. Lotus was purchased by IBM, and then they spun that off, and it went out to Iris Associates, and so on. All right. So Ray Ozzie worked there for a while. That's the picture here. And then he left there and started a company called Groove Networks. Enter 2005. And Ray Ozzie gets bought. This pioneer gets bought. His company gets bought by a little company you've heard of called Microsoft. And here we go. And he actually not only came to work for Microsoft, but in 2005, Bill Gates stepped away completely from Microsoft, and Ray Ozzie became the CTO or the chief software architect, excuse me, of Microsoft. He became the new Bill Gates. and he wrote a 5,000 word internal memo called The Internet Services Disruption. And he said, listen, Microsoft, if you don't do this thing and you don't start creating something to move your thing to the cloud, and no one even knew what that was. There was Amazon out there that was doing mostly virtual machines. He said, if you don't do that, the business, you're going to lose in business. And everybody sat back and took notice. And in 2008, he started a project or announced a project. You can see this here at the PDC, the Professional Developers Conference, where he said, we're going to make a thing called Windows Azure. And that's the year after this is when I joined Windows Azure from the Red Dog project. Now, Red Dog was the code name for Azure. The reason it was called Red Dog, by the way, is because there's a place just off of the campus of Microsoft in Redmond called the Pink Poodle. It was a bar.
Mm-hmm.
And the folks that worked on it at the Pink Poodle or the Red Dog. And that's where the code name comes from. Well, he put a couple of people in charge. One you might not have heard of, but the other guy you may have heard of, his name was Dave Cutler. You may know Dave Cutler from such hits as the DEC virtual machine system and a little thing called Windows NT. He invented that. So he was put in charge of making this thing called a live mesh, and that became Red Dog, which then became Windows Azure. So it was really kind of interesting. And if you look at what it was supposed to be done, it was supposed to have 5 categories of things. We wanted Windows Azure for compute, it's storage and networking, things like that. We wanted Microsoft SQL Server to run in the cloud, but as a service, not as a virtual machine. And then we wanted to allow developers to have .NET services. And we wanted to have a thing called live services for file sharing. And then we wanted, as you can see here, SharePoint and CRM. So that's the deal. And he basically told the cloud, hey, this is the transformation of our software and the transformation of Microsoft. Now, I was here during that time. It was not an easy transition. Folks were very set in selling software that you bought and installed on your local system, and you use that. And they said, people just aren't going to get used to this. No one will ever use the cloud and so on. So we had to get over it. So they actually switched Microsoft to Azure. And it was kind of interesting that we went through these things. Now, when we originally wrote Azure, we wrote it with just these services in mind. And you'll probably notice there's no virtual machines, there's no service hub, there's no message bus, there's none of these things. We felt developers were going to write software and run it on Azure. There you go. Well, by June 2012, we realized that developers and companies, more companies than developers, were not really interested in that. They were actually interested in just running virtual machines. And so we went back to the team that was now running Azure, and we said, look, and I was on this team, and said, look, we've got to have virtual machines. We've just got to have virtual machines. But we hadn't built it that way. So we had to retool Azure to have these virtual machines while keeping the platform as a service, the ability to write software and we'll run it for you. We wanted to keep that as a first-class citizen, but we realized that people wanted these virtual machines and other services as well. So we started moving those over, and some of your listeners might be familiar back in those days where we were still running like 2 portals. There'd be one kind of portal, and then we had a different portal, and you'd click things and it would go to the other one. That was that transition where we were redoing the operating system that runs Azure, which is called our Fabric. So nowadays, we have over 600 different services that it's stunning what we have. And it's not just the data centers anymore, which are all over the world. And we always pair them up. So if we build one data center, we build 2 that are geographically separated, but geographically stable, meaning we don't build near volcanoes or earthquake zones and so on. It's very difficult to build one of these things. They need a lot of power and water and so on. So we built these all over the world, but we didn't just start there and stay there. In 2016, we began to add in IoT. Internet of Things. So now you could run things on your watch or your phone or whatever, and it had a full hub and an edge service built in and a central place that you could do things. And not only that, we then took a data center and we sunk it and put it in the ocean to see how that would work, see if the cooling would be better and so on. That's still running. And we also have in 2020, we announced and launched Azure Orbital. And it's a ground station, and it helps you to move to satellite clouds. It's really kind of interesting. It's part of the Starlink constellations in LEO, or low Earth orbit. So
Mm-hmm.
I started with PCs, and in 1979, Ozzie kind of started there. I first worked on, Lotus stuff and VisiCalc before that. That's what Ozzie was involved in inventing. I worked at NASA, and now Azure is running on things that are in low Earth orbit that are launched from the same space center I used to work at. So that's the background, and that's where all this stuff comes from. And there's just, Simon, there's so many services, there's so many things you can do to find out what's going on is sometimes a little difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, it is very difficult. If I go, you said you started with 5 services, and if I go ahead and log into Azure, which you can go ahead and use a free account to log in, there's a lot to go ahead and get started. And I'll definitely ask you on how one should go ahead and get started, Bug. But I have a little, let's say, a brainless question. Okay, so so Bug, you were working in this Red Dog team, right? That was earlier known as that was actually Azure, right? So was it a secret project? Did you guys work like an FBI agent? Did you had like a top secret in outside your office? How was working there? Did you tell your colleagues that you're working on a version of Azure or something like that?
Yeah, it's we do have things that are kept like every company. There are certain things that are kept close to the vest,
Mm-hmm.
announcements and so on. We still do this in the group. I'm in the engineering team, so I will
Okay.
know about a project we're going to do, and then maybe we don't do it. So we don't announce it because you don't want the negative press if it doesn't work. You don't want
Yeah.
someone saying, "Oh, you were going to do a thing, but you couldn't." Every company does that. So we did have some of that in Azure, but we're pretty transparent about what we're working on. We publish our roadmap. That's unlike some other companies that don't publish a roadmap. We actually do publish ours. And we take it on the chin when it doesn't work right, and people are saying, hey, you said you were going to, well, things changed and so on. But in the early days, the way that you do something at Microsoft that's new, this is back in that day. It's not the same anymore. But we had a thing called incubation where we would create a product and it would be sort of walled off from the rest of the company on certain levels. And what that basically means is you had your own software developers, your own marketing teams, and your own legal folks and that sort of thing. And you were walled off. And then they would see if it made a profit or if we were going to go forward with it. And if we were, it would be called graduated, and it would go out to the field for the regular Microsoft folks to now sell and support that. That was the way that worked back in that time. So yes, we did have that for Azure. And as we were working through things, I remember being on some of the very early projects. And it's always a nerve-wracking time when you're trying to build a global service that people are going to use and depend on. Like hospitals are using this, and nuclear power plants are using this, and so on. You can't make mistakes. So
Mm-hmm.
it's a very nerve-wracking thing to do, but it was very exciting. It did come out as Windows Azure and SQL Azure. Nowadays, of course, it's called the Microsoft Azure platform, and
Mm-hmm.
SQL Azure has now become Azure SQL DB, or the Azure Data Platform more broadly. Which is difficult for me. I will constantly say things like, "Oh, in SQL Azure," and everybody goes, "No, Buck, it's been 15 years since that's been called that. Please start calling it Azure Data." And I'm like, "Yeah, I know, I remember." But you just got so used to saying that, right?
Yeah, yeah, but it's good to know that you had on how you guys built it. I'm thankful that there were no 9 feet walls within Microsoft where you had different teams.
No. We're not that kind of a secretive company. I know there are
Yeah,
some tech companies that are
yeah.
very, very secretive. We're not
Mhm.
really like that.
That's very good to know. I see Microsoft very much committed to open source and all these days, so that's good to know. Bug. Now let's get back to the learning of Azure. Right, as you said, you guys started with 5 services. Now it's over 600 now. So if I want to go ahead and get started with Azure, right, I'll get confused. So what should be my take? What should be my first step to go ahead and get started with Azure?
Yeah, there's a lot of training and things you can take, but
Hmm.
recently, one of our engineers out, not based in Redmond, his name is Alexi, did most amazing project. And I just wanted to share it with everybody because this is a really approachable way. It is called AzureCharts.com, AzureCharts.com, AzureCharts.com. If you go there, you get this view. I mean, it is just absolutely stunning what this guy's written. Just a labor of love he's done. And basically, I will do things like I'll just pop over to see our solutions. So I'm just going to click on that. And if your listeners go to that right now, here are the families of things we have. And you can sort of see all the different ones we have. And here's what's kind of interesting. Let's say I'm interested. What is this cognitive services thing here? What is that? I'll click on it. And as I do, you'll notice that other services sort of light up. And these are the things that can interact with, or that it can interact with, the cognitive services that I've clicked on. Then if you click this little arrow here, you see all the different articles and so on that are involved with that particular service. So just a stunning way to work with it. I'll go back up here, and this is the sort of the point that you and I had talked about. It is the learning side. So I'm just going to do the Learning Explorer. And let's say I'm like, wow, that looks pretty interesting. I wonder what this is. Let me go see. So this loads the learning data that you'll see here. And then I can click on each of these little areas that we saw a moment ago. And when I click on them, that same box here, let's just do that. I click on cognitive services. And if I click on this same box, there's all of the training,
Wow.
116 pieces
Wow.
of training to get started with a little description on how you do it. Now, I wanted to call out one thing. If you'll notice, there's these learning modules. So let's do add basic conversational intelligence. I'm just grabbing this one. This is a language understanding system. So this, when you talk to your phone or you talk to your computer and it understands what you're saying, this is how that does that. And you don't have to write it. So I'll just click this one, and a learning module is going to pop over to Microsoft Learn. And Microsoft Learn is a free environment that will let you create a language understanding solution here. You can log into it with your, doesn't cost anything. It's all free. Once you log in, you can begin to start the process. You get modules here. You get a quick little test. And it will even automatically provision, in a lot of cases, the Azure resources for free. So you get a full Azure environment, no credit card, nothing. You just start working. It is just a stunning thing. I just can't tell you enough about this guy here. Let me show you his resource there. It's just amazing what he's done here. It's developed by a Microsoft employee. And if you click that, you'll go to his LinkedIn page. And it's Alexi, as I talked about. He's just an amazing guy. He's over there in Germany right now. Stunning. And if you get the chance, make sure you say, hey, thanks for doing this, because he's literally just doing this as a labor of love on his own, although he's getting worldwide press for this. So he's well known for doing this product.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, this solves a big problem. For instance, if I need to go ahead and get started with machine learning with Azure, right? I have an expertise. I've been doing it, right? Or I might be doing it in some other clouds. And if I want to go ahead and get started with machine learning in Azure, I just click on one of these tiles and all the related services will be highlighted. And not just that, I can also go ahead and look for the learning resources and get started with it. Absolutely
Absolutely. And
great.
he's even published, I told you about our timeline, but he even tells you about what things are coming. So in Q1 of 2022, if you wanted to learn more about what's coming in Azure Purview, it will actually show you the regions and so on and
Wow.
what's coming in Azure Purview. Just a really amazing job that Alexi did. So I'm just very proud of his effort. And it's awesome. By the way, this is running in Azure.
That's cool. So here's one my another dumb question, Park. Now I believe it's Azure. Everyone is putting their solution on Azure. So to my understanding, even Azure is running on Azure, isn't it?
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Right.
All of Microsoft, I get paid by Azure. I get my employee
Yeah.
numbers from Azure. We migrated all our internal systems to Azure. We build and deploy on Azure when we're building software. It's all running in Azure. Everything's in Azure.
Wow,
Yep.
wow,
Yep.
wow. So if I'm so since you were in this, since you were in the initial part of this Azure bug, so did you guys really debug Azure? How did that part go?
Yeah, it's actually ongoing, and we talk a lot
Okay.
about the fabric that we've written. You've heard about things like Kubernetes or other kinds
Yeah.
of software fabrics. We're very similar to that, but we predate that by a long time. It's a fascinating read. Mark Russinovich does an amazing job. If you want to look up some of the architecture of Azure, he's done lots of things and will even give you a tour of our data centers. One of the things
Cool.
we did was we make sure that the people who wrote the software were not allowed to go to a data center, and the people who are in a data center are not allowed to log into the software. That way, no one's able to do things they're not supposed to do. Even the light configurations and the printer
Mm-hmm.
configurations, we're very careful to make sure we do things that meet security and data sovereignty requirements around the world. And it has the most security certifications of any cloud.
I didn't knew that. I mean, I have seen Azure Data Centers videos on YouTube. They look absolutely stunning, very much secure. But I didn't knew developers can go to data centers and guys working there can write software.
That's right.
That's very good to know.
That's right.
But yeah, what I was going to ask, yeah, out of these 600 services, Buck, right? I believe you have used many of them, right?
A lot, but not all.
Yeah. So, which one is your favorite? Couple of favorite from your
I
end,
mean,
or at least you would
obviously,
suggest.
yeah, Azure Data, that whole world, and I'm
Hmm.
very, very fond of Azure machine learning. It's just I watched it grow up
Yeah.
from its initial release. I used to teach
Hmm.
classes on how to use it and so on, and now it's so incredibly powerful. And the
Hmm.
way these things are all linked is the power. That is the power. If you do something in Azure machine learning, you can use that in Azure Data Factory, and you
Yeah.
can use that in Azure Synapse. And if you do something in Synapse, you can look at it in Power BI and so on. So I love that everything's very integrated. Since we do make all these products, they automatically work together, whereas we're not cobbling together services from other places.
I love it too. And to be honest, I miss the Azure Machine Learning Classic that we had in the past, right? I miss that. It's still up there if you guys want to go
It
ahead and
is.
use
It
it.
is
If you
indeed.
don't,
Yep.
yeah, you still can go ahead and use it. And I think it's time we're reaching towards the end of the show. And I quickly want to thank everyone, Jonah, Sarah, .NET, Wim, and everyone who has joined. Thank you so much for joining the show. So before we go ahead and wrap the show, Buck, any final thing you want to plug in for our audience?
Well, I would just say, whatever you do, go take advantage of that free learning. It'll help your career, even if you don't plan to use it soon. Learning is never wasted.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Bug. Thank you once again for accepting the invitation. It was absolutely great. And thank you everyone who has joined us. We will see you next Thursday on a new topic around Azure. Until then, take good care of yourself and keep learning Azure. Ta-ra. Bye.